All right, hey everybody. Welcome to the meeting. Hope you guys are having a great day. Good afternoon, everyone. Just have a few of us so far, but obviously numbers will jump up once we get right to 2:30. So thanks everybody for your time and attention today. Let me just close a window over here so there's less ambient sound in the background. But hi all y'all and welcome. Hi, hello everybody. Good to see you. Feel free as you're arriving to say hello. You really want these drawings, man. I mean, it's not going to be nothing. If I draw a cat, there you go. Your wish is my command. Anyway, in this one case, check it out. Beautiful artistic site. I mean, you know, if I really, I don't even know. Never mind. I'm not going to finish that sentence. I was going to say if I really sat down and like tried my hardest, maybe I could make a better picture, but it would probably just be worse. The level of detail would make it horrific or something like that, or the attempt. But yeah, thank you. I appreciate it. Hi, everyone else. Got about 4 minutes until it's 2:30. So just hopefully you're comfortable, ready to get in this lecture, and then we'll be on to our weekend, or at least in this class. I know probably a lot of you guys have class tomorrow too. I have a few lectures tomorrow also. Schrodinger's cat. That's a fascinating case. You guys know a little bit about quantum physics. Basically, photon appears to take like infinite possible paths on its way towards landing in a position after it's fired out of a photon emission device. This is one possible explanation of the interference pattern that you see in the double slit experiments. Now, suppose there was a cat inside a box which would die if a photon strikes a plate when the photon's fired in that direction. So the photon either is going to strike the plate or it's not. Now, according to one possible theory of quantum physics, both events occur in different branches of quantum reality. In another possible explanation, the photon is in a superposition of states when it collapses in the end on one definite landing position. But because of the fact that it's in this superposition, or on the no collapse theory, that there are two branches of quantum reality, you have this problem explaining what happens to the cat. You know, like, is the cat dead then? Because if the photon had struck, it would be dead. But it seems like since the photon's path of travel includes both hitting and not hitting the plate, we therefore have to maybe consider the possibility of two branches of quantum reality, one in which the cat is alive and another in which it's dead. You know, it boggles the mind. We could go on and on talking about all this stuff. But whenever someone mentions the Schrodinger's cat, I think of the case. It's an interesting and fascinating scenario to ponder, and it's really revelatory of the deep mysteries of quantum physics. Am I good at Mario Kart? Yeah, I mean, I'm not as good as when I was in my prime, let's say, maybe back in college when I was playing a lot of Double Dash on the GameCube. But I'm decent, you know. Mario Kart 8 on the Switch. I play it off and on. I play, you know, online. A lot of people around the world. And there's a lot of good people out there. I don't know. Sometimes I'm in the middle. Sometimes I'm top 4. Sometimes I could win, but I'm not elite like I am in Tetris. Okay. Hello, everybody. It's good to see everybody here. If you have any questions when we get to 2:30 in just about a minute, if you have any questions about anything, the class, the homework, or anything else, you know, just do let me know, because I'm going to review it a little bit to start the meeting. But I see all you guys: Nasser, Tamara, Jamie, Fabio, Gil, Araceli, Jasmine, Jillian. It's good to be here with you guys and have this meeting on this nice Wednesday. I mean, it's kind of nice here. I know there's a lot of fires going on all up and down the state. I have relatives that are living up there in those areas that are more affected by the fires, and it's tough for them with the air quality. So I guess, knock on wood, hopefully it stays decent out here in the Southern California region. Yeah, so Lane, a good question. The first homework is due on Monday before class. Anytime, so you know, it doesn't have to be by 11:59 p.m. or 11:59 of that day. Get it in by email attachment no later than 2:30 p.m. of Monday. So it's like you're turning it in class at the class meeting. Okay, good question. Yeah, I've seen the pictures. It's brutal. What can I do? Just teach you guys a little bit of critical thinking, and maybe we'll have a better planet someday in the future if there's enough of us that make the right judgments. Okay, so yeah, guys, welcome back. Very happy to be with everyone. Since it's now 2:30, I'm going to go ahead and get us underway for our Wednesday, September 9th meeting of Critical Thinking, Intro to Critical Thinking, Philosophy 105. So last lecture, we kind of went over the different forms of deductively valid argument. We had a nice long weekend, so hope you guys got an extra chance to rest and relax. But when we were here a week ago, we were talking about these different forms of deductively valid argument, and we studied 4 of them. So I want to review those with you guys a little bit and kind of help you understand any confusing things there may be with the homework, so that you can have a good, successful first homework assignment that you submit on Monday. Now, let me just review some of the different types of arguments that we covered last time. First of all, hi there, Raymond, and everyone else in the chat. At any point, feel free to chime in and say hello or comment or question anything. But okay, so the first of these 4 forms of deductively valid argument that we looked at was the disjunctive syllogism, aka argument from elimination. So I would love it if some student here could just quickly say, how does the form go of disjunctive syllogism? So this is one of the 4 forms of deductively valid argument that we learned about. But just tell me how the format goes. It's a disjunctive syllogism. How does this type of argument play out using the format? Okay, good, Jamie. First of all, either A or B. Second premise following that is not B. Therefore, conclusion, sorry, not A in your example, and therefore the conclusion would be B. All right, that's a disjunctive syllogism. That's the form that it does have. It starts with a sentence that is called a disjunction. A disjunction is simply an either-or statement. And the letters A and B there, they stand for whatever the information is that is disjoined by the word or. So, you know, either I will watch the lecture on YouTube, or I will watch the replay of the lecture later. I was not able to attend the live recording, so I watched it as a replay later. Okay, so like we have an either or of 2 cases, A and B. When one of them is eliminated, it is the other one that is concluded. So that's disjunctive syllogism. Now there's also this other possible way that it can go. What's the other way that this could play out? It could be instead of not A, another option, which is also valid, is if the second premise says what? The other possibility, and wait for it, not B, right? So it could have said not B, in which case the conclusion would be A, on the other hand. All right, so that's what a disjunctive syllogism is. Question though, let me ask you this. Is this correct? Is this okay? Is this valid? This way of writing it? Hi, Sebastian. No, that's not valid. Good. So this one's not valid. What's wrong with it? What's the problem? What's the reason that this one's not? Yes, I will go over the details, Jillian, but we have to review these things first, and this is relevant to the assignment. So if you're listening to this, it's going to help you, at least when we get to the other 3 forms. Yeah, because you're not supposed to affirm the disjunct on the second premise. It has to be the elimination of one of the two disjuncts. So that is not correct. It has to be not A or not B on the second line. And then we conclude with the other non-eliminated disjunct. Okay, so next question. What's modus ponens? How does that go? So there are three different types of hypothetical syllogism. Jillian, you asking about the homework? The homework has to do just with those three things. So this is helping to review it, and we're also going to go over it in more depth after this. What's modus ponens? It's one of the three hypothetical syllogisms, but how does it go? What's the format of modus ponens? Okay, Gabriel. If A, then B, A, therefore B. Now I know that you guys are just writing one premise in and then hitting return, but since there's so many other students that are also going to be, putting their stuff down, it'll get a little disconnected. So I know that it breaks from the standard form because you'd like to, break to the next line. But at least for the purposes of these live chats, you can go ahead and put the whole argument, if you like, in one text. So you're right, Gabriel. Same thing, Adeline, although you haven't written the conclusion yet, but maybe you will. So here's modus ponens. So the first premise of this type of argument says, if A, then B. And then the second premise of this type of argument continues by affirming the antecedent A. Therefore, the conclusion is B. So that's how modus ponens goes. The other name for modus ponens, Jamie, is affirming the antecedent. Okay, and let me explain why. This type of sentence that is written here is called a hypothetical. It's an if-then. They're also sometimes known as conditionals, but whether you call it conditional or hypothetical, those are the names of it. Now, there are two parts to the hypothetical sentence. Tell me, what's the name of this part that says if A? What's the word for that part of a hypothetical? They call it a what? An what? An antecedent. Yes, that's the antecedent component of the hypothetical. The other portion of it, which says then B, what is the word for that part of the hypothetical? So there's two parts to every hypothetical. There's an antecedent, which comes first, and then the second part, which comes second, is called the consequent, exactly. So this modus ponens is also known as affirming the antecedent. And that is because in this type of argument, it's the antecedent which is being affirmed here on the second premise, right? So with this type of argument, we begin with a hypothetical, if A then B. We proceed to the affirmation of the antecedent, A, and then we reach the conclusion, which is B. So what could be an example of that? If I drop the pen, if I open my hand, this pen will fall. I open my hand, therefore the pen fell. If I water the plants, they will grow. I watered the plants, therefore they did grow. If I read the book, then I will understand the material. I read the book, therefore I understand the material. So those are all different valid examples of this form, which is called modus ponens. But here's something that you cannot do when you're doing modus ponens. This is wrong. That's wrong. Because this is not affirming the antecedent. That would be affirming the consequent, which is invalid. So just make sure to keep it straight in your mind. And when you have modus ponens, it's in that exact type of order that we just went through. Okay, now, we're not done yet. So there's two more to review. There's also modus, what is called modus tollens. Let's see who can just tell us what is modus tollens. How does it go? What's the format of a modus tollens argument? It's supposed to be the letter N, sorry. Hopefully you can see that. So modus tollens, I don't know if I would call it the opposite of modus ponens, but let's see the descriptions given by you guys. So if A then B, not B, therefore not A. Exactly. It's denying the consequent. Perfect. So those are correct statements. Here's how it goes, just to put it on the board. If A then B, from here we go to not B. Therefore, thus, not A. Now, this type of argument is called modus tollens. Sometimes it's also called denying the consequent. The consequent. And why is it called denying the consequent? Because of the second premise, which denies the consequent clause of the conditional. So if I drop this pen, if I open my hand, this pen is going to fall, but the pen does not fall. Therefore, I didn't open my hand. If I run, then I will sweat, but I'm not sweating, so therefore I did not run today. If I, let's see, if I fall off a motorcycle, I'm going to get an injury, but I'm not injured, so I didn't fall off the motorcycle. Okay, so in any situation where one fact will cause another, we can deduce that if the consequence did not happen, then the cause of the consequence also must not have happened. So that's how modus tollens works. But let's be all clear about one mistake that we don't want to make. This would be wrong. If a person said not A, therefore not B, that is not correct. That's denying the wrong part. The denial in modus tollens is specifically of the consequent, not of the antecedent. So Gabby, you write, if I clean my room, my room will be clean. So, but that's not following the correct format, okay? You see it written. Let's get the right version up here again, just because I want you to understand this. Okay, so Gabby, what you wrote is, if I clean my room will be clean. What should be the second premise, though? Because what you wrote is not correct. You wrote, but I didn't clean. That's not right, though. Let's look at the form. And also, Gabby, what you wrote above, not B, therefore if A, that's not right. Because the conclusion is not the words if A. The conclusion is not A. So, Gabby, I want you to correct your example. Can you write it again and do it the correct way? If I clean my room will be clean, period. What's the second sentence? And I'm telling you, it's not the statement that I did not clean. Just match to the form that you see written here. What should be the second premise of your example, Gabby? The second premise should say, instead of I did not clean, this is, the example you gave is a little odd too, because it's clean and clean is used in both the antecedent and the consequent. But be careful. What is the second premise supposed to say in your case? If I clean my room will be clean. What has been denied in the second premise? Not what? Not B. But what you wrote says not A. You're saying I didn't clean, which is denying the wrong part. Okay, so that's the exact thing that I'm trying to help you with. The second premise has to say what? Just write it. Type it in the chat, please. What does the second premise have to say of your example? If I clean my room will be clean. But what? But I didn't. But what did not happen? Or what is not the case? I mean, you had it. I almost had it. No, Gabby, you wrote the same thing again. I didn't clean is the thing I told you was wrong. That the room isn't clean. Okay? If I clean my room will be clean. But the room is not clean. Therefore, I did not clean it. It's a confusing example because of the hyperabundance of the word clean all over the place. But there's a difference between you cleaning it and it being clean. If you clean it, it'll be clean. But it's not clean, so I didn't clean it. Okay? Just trying to help you out, because I don't want you to come away with writing an incorrect example and I didn't correct it. It has to be corrected right now live. So understand that when you come back to this and you replay it and look at the chat, what it should have said is, if I clean my room will be clean. It is not clean, so I did not clean it. Okay, Celine, if I climb a tree, then I will get hurt. I did not get hurt, and therefore I didn't climb the tree. Very good. Exactly. Jamie, if I play Mario Kart, then I will turn on my Switch. I didn't turn on the Switch, so I didn't play Mario Kart. Yes, doesn't that make logical sense? Because for you to play it, it had to have been turned on. So if you're playing it, then the system is on. But the system's not on, so you're not playing, clearly. Good. Okay, perfect. So just helping you with modus tollens one more time. Now, one more. Kind of got into it closer to the end of the last period, so I want to make sure this is sinking in. There's chain argument also. Now, who could say what is the overall format of the chain argument? How does it go? Take me through those steps. Let's just make it have two premises, although in this case there could be more. So Adeline, you writing if A then B, good. Followed by the second statement, if B then C, correct. Therefore, conclusion, if A then C. Exactly, and that's what I see many of you writing, which is great. Okay, so I'll put it here. Chain argument. Therefore, if A then C. That's a chain argument, and the basic thing that it is saying is that if this occurs, this will result from it. But if that result happens, it will cause something else as a further consequence. So what we can thus conclude is that if the initial event happens, then ultimately this down the line consequence will also occur. So, you know, if I trip him, he will fall, and if he falls, he will break his glasses. So if I trip him, then he'll break his glasses. If I graduate Cal State Fullerton, then I can get a good job, and if I get a good job, then I can buy a house. So if I graduate Cal State Fullerton, then I can buy a house. You see what I'm doing here? This is just chain argument. One fact is claimed to be the cause of some consequence, which in its own turn is the cause that leads to a further on consequence. And so where the argument concludes is to link these two pieces of the chain together. Now in the chain argument, there can be more than two premises. It could continue and say if C then D, and if that were so, then the conclusion given would have to reflect that. So if it was to provide an additional premise, what will our conclusion be now in this case? The conclusion now becomes, sorry, I kind of smudged that a little bit. Now our little conclusion should say what? If what, then what? Just making sure that you follow that part. If A, then D. Good, Melissa. And notice how, again, we see that feature, that it links the first part to the last part, however many premises there happen to be. Okay? So that's my review of the different forms of deductively valid argument. And then let me go over the homework then, again, with you guys. So in the homework, there's 10 problems, right? And each one of them contains a few sentences, but there's one sentence that's missing. So in every example of A through J, there's one sentence that's missing from a fully stated argument. What you have to do is to write down or type, however you're submitting the work, you have to type or write down the statements that the textbook provides, include the missing sentence that was not provided, write it all in standard form, and then write what type of argument the whole thing was, whether it's modus ponens, modus tollens, or the chain argument. So let's be very clear. The answer to each question A through J is going to be modus ponens, modus tollens, or chain argument. You have three options, and you have to figure out which one of those three each one is. But that's not all. You have to say what kind of argument it is, and you have to write the full argument out and include the missing sentence. With regard to the missing sentence, indicate somehow that that's the one that you had to supply by perhaps starring it, circling it, or highlighting it in some fashion. Let me give you an example. Now, this is not one of the homework problems, but there are homework problems in there that are very similar to this. Okay, so it says, if John is a student at Cal State Fullerton, then John applied for Cal State Fullerton. Okay? But John did not apply. Okay, so say I give you these two sentences, and I tell you there's something missing, and also you got to it's missing. If John's a student at Cal State Fullerton, then he applied for the school, but he didn't apply. So therefore, what? Tell me what you think. Therefore, John does not go to Cal State Fullerton, right? Therefore, he's not a student there. Yeah. So John is not a student at Cal State Fullerton. Now, what type of argument is this? Good, Cheyenne. It's modus tollens. Why is it modus tollens? Well, let's just look at the format. This says if something, then something. So A is taken up by the statement that John is a student at Cal State Fullerton. That's the antecedent. So in case that's true, this is a consequence that must be also true, that he applied. But he didn't apply. What is this statement that he did not apply? That is the denial of the consequent. And so we can therefore conclude with the denial of the antecedent. And this is modus tollens. You would, let's say, like indicate here with a star or highlighter or something that this was the missing sentence of the argument. And then that would be like a perfect 10 out of 10. So there's 10 problems, A through J. Each one can receive a maximum of 10 points. So if you get 10 for 10, that's 100 points for the first homework, and that would be a perfect score. But where can I deduct points from? I can deduct points if it's not in standard form, first of all. So like if you just wrote all this stuff, but you wrote it just in a continuous like paragraph, that would be an error. No, Clarissa, you do not have to explain it. You just have to give the correct information. Like you just have to say what it is. That's all. So it has to be in standard form. If it's not in standard form, I'll deduct some points right there. Like I've seen some students turn in this assignment and all they wrote was just the name of the type of argument and the missing sentence. That's also not okay. You have to write the whole argument, including all the sentences provided by the textbook and the one that you had to input yourself. Okay, so it would not be correct, for example, if someone just saw these two pieces and then wrote, John is not a student at Cal State Fullerton, modus tollens. Like you'd get some deduction in that case because you didn't write the full argument. You have to write the full argument because in most of these cases, I'll just tell you it's the conclusion that's missing, but not in every single case. There's at least one example where a premise is the thing that's missing. So if all you did was write the missing sentence, you're not showing the professor whether you thought it was the premise or the conclusion of the argument. Okay, so write the full argument in standard form. It is exercise 8-3, part 1, A through J. Is that what you're asking, Gabby? It's on page 252, and instructions have been sent through the announcement system. But yeah, it's page 252, exercise 8-3, part 1, A through J. It's A through J, it's part 1. Just part 1, not part 2. So like I've said, you have to write in standard form. You have to write the name of the argument type, which is going to be either modus tollens, modus ponens, or chain argument. The disjunctive syllogism is not being quizzed or questioned in this homework assignment. That's something that I'll include on like the midterm and quizzes in the future. This one's just dealing with the other three things, the hypothetical syllogisms. So the information you have to give is the missing sentence, highlight it, tell me what type of argument it is, and put the whole thing in standard form like that. Okay? Now let me talk to you guys about another little tricky thing that might throw some folks off when they do this. Okay. All right, now, let me just try to work this out with you. What I want to put on the board right now is an example of a modus tollens argument. I want to continue to talk to you guys about modus tollens for just a minute. If this is modus tollens, what should the second premise say now? The first premise says if I don't go to class, then I'll be dropped. Okay? If this is modus tollens, no problem, Alex, and everybody else. I appreciate your comments. If this is a modus tollens argument, what should the second premise now say? No. No, Adelina, I'm sorry, that's not right. I was not dropped, right? Because I'm asking about modus tollens. So modus tollens is the denial of the consequent. The original statement says that I will be dropped. So the opposite of that is what has to be the second premise. In other words, I was not dropped. What would be the conclusion of this modus tollens argument? What would be the conclusion of this one? Therefore, I did go to class. Yes. Therefore, I went to class. Now, why do I mention this example? Because sometimes when you're dealing with negations, the negation of a sentence is the negation of a negation. And that flips it around back to being in the affirmative. So like sentences can have an opposite. If I tell you that I'm wearing glasses, the opposite of that is the sentence that I am not wearing glasses. So those two things are opposite sentences. Not B, the second premise of the modus tollens, depends on what B says originally. So in this case, B says that I'll be dropped. Therefore, the reverse of that is I was not dropped. The conclusion of modus tollens is the negation, the reverse of the antecedent, not A. But in this case, A itself is originally stated in the negative, not going to class. So what is the opposite of not going to class? Going to class. Okay, so this is not A. Even though it's not stated in the negative, it's the reverse of the original antecedent. So you have to kind of be alert to what information is provided in the sentences within a modus tollens argument. If the original statement to be negated is a negation, it turns it to an affirmative. Like, let me make sure that that makes sense to you. You're watching this lecture right now. I know that much. So is this correct? Right now, you're not watching this lecture. Is that correct? Is it correct to say that right now, you're not watching this? Are you not watching a YouTube video right now? Exactly. Yes. The statement that you are not watching a video is not true. So you're not watching a video. In other words, you are. Okay, so not is like are doing something, or is. I'm wearing glasses. So I'm not wearing glasses. Does that make sense? The statement that I'm not wearing glasses, that's not true. So I'm not wearing the glasses. No one would normally say that. In everyday life, you say things in the affirmative. Although sometimes people say it's not wrong, like they mean you are right. But either way you go, just keep in mind that there can be double negations. That's all that I'm trying to mention here. Sometimes they can trick you when you deal with these modus tollens examples. So like, I don't know, I'm not going to give away any answers, but when it says, if it didn't rain today, I'd have to water the garden, and then it follows that by saying I won't have to water the garden, you know, you might have to think a little bit about how to conclude that argument, okay? Anyway, just a couple of little helpful hints and pointers. So I think I've said everything that I can think to say for now about the homework assignment that's due on our Monday class. Anything else about it, though, that maybe I haven't thought of or that's on your mind? Let me know. If you have any questions or anything about it, feel free anytime to just throw them into the chat, and we can talk about them, okay? So I'm going to erase this. And then with the rest of today's meeting, we're going to try and talk a little bit about some of the stuff from Chapter 1 of our textbook. So far, this class has all really been more about the Chapter 8 material, which deals with, you know, argument and what is deduction and induction, what's validity, what's soundness, you know, and what are the different forms of deductively valid argument, modus ponens, modus tollens, and all those. Chapter 1 goes on to talk about some very fundamentally important social psychology experiments that give a sense of the importance of being a good critical thinker. And then they kind of launch into what are the qualities that good critical thinkers usually have, so we can try to like emulate those qualities and build them up in ourselves? What are some of the benefits that come from being a good critical thinker? And then finally, it discusses what are some of the obstacles and barriers that get in the way of being a critical thinker. What are the reasons that we don't always do it, or that we sometimes have habits, intellectual habits, that prevent us from doing it right? Okay, so to get that whole chapter discussion started, they begin with reference to these two famous social psychology experiments. They're often mentioned in psychology classes, but they're also really important to critical thinking, and that's why it's right at the beginning of chapter 1. So now think back to World War II, right, and the horrors of the whole Nazi Germany time period. After the Allies toppled, Nazi Germany, the Nuremberg trials were conducted, and so a lot of those Nazi officers that had been overseeing the Holocaust were put on trial and executed, in this international criminal court. Now, many of them pled for mercy, and they hoped that they would receive some type of lenience, because you may know or not know, but the majority that gave any defense of their behavior, they generally said what? What was the reason they said, don't find fault with me, take it up with the higher authority, because basically I was what? You know about this? Like the Nazi officers at the Nuremberg trials, they kind of just, almost universally, they kept saying that they were just what? Anybody know that? What excuse they gave to try and, justify what they had done, or at least excuse them from full responsibility or blame? Exactly, following orders. They'll say that's what they did say. They said, I was just following orders. I didn't create this entire system or plan. I was just a member of the bureaucracy that was implementing these things. So, don't come down so hard on me. I was just following orders. But that was not a valid excuse, legally, morally, or anything else. Although they were following orders, these were horrific, genocidal, immoral, and illegal orders. So you have to think a little bit for yourself about what people are asking you to do, even if they are a presumed authority figure. Otherwise, you put yourself on the hook for liability in case you're going to be asked to do something wrong. So good critical thinkers of the world don't behave that way. They don't just say, oh, someone told me to do something, and they have a title or they have a position, so I've got to listen to them and not ask questions. You're supposed to think a little bit and make judgment about what it is that people ask you to do or ask you to believe. So just mindlessly following orders, especially when they cross, moral lines, is not excusable. Not for a critical thinker. You're not supposed to just say, hey, I don't think, I just act. People tell me what to do, I follow orders. You're supposed to think a little bit critically on your own independent judgment about the substance, the appropriateness, and so forth of any kind of command that you're given from whoever. Now, that chapter starts with reference to these horrors and atrocities because it's the subject matter and the inspiration for a couple of very important social psychology experiments that followed shortly after that in history. So in the early 1960s, there's this experiment that has become very famous, and it's called the Milgram Experiment, or the Milgram study. Okay, so Milgram Experiment. So this is in the early 1960s, between like 1960 and 1963, and it was at Yale University, over there on the East Coast. It was done under the supervision of this psychologist and researcher named Stanley Milgram. Okay, now this experiment has kind of become so famous and well-known and widely understood that that some of you maybe have heard of it, or maybe you've been exposed to it through other studies that you've had, or just on your own through the pop culture. Yeah, Tuan, I'm not sure. I'm sure someone will give you the answer on that, but you can always find time to get the answer. Hopefully, if any of you know, you can let them know if there's a source for the book. I personally don't know. But back to my question, Stanley Milgram's experiment. Do any of you guys know anything about it? Can anybody even say like anything about what was being done in this experiment or what it was trying to study? Got a lot of people in the class, so I'm thinking maybe a few of you have been somehow aware of this. You heard of it, Kelly? Okay, good. Can anybody even throw out, like, even if it's very vaguely half remembered, like any kind of detail from it? That's not the prison study, actually. We're going to talk about that just in a moment, Clarissa. That's the other one that we'll mention just now. It is an obedience study. It's the shock one. Yes, Ashley. Yes, Hannah. That's correct. So let me add some more details to this. Milgram and other people living in around that time period, this is not even a generation after World War II ended. And so people were curious about this social question. How obedient are human beings? Like how willing are people to just follow orders and comply with orders simply because they think that it's coming from some perceived authority figure? Will people follow orders even when the orders that they are being given are clearly crossing the line into something bad, wrong, and destructive? Will people be willing to just keep following these orders, or will they stand up and refuse? So what they said they were doing is, let's recruit volunteers to participate in this study. And when the 2 volunteers show up, they said, okay, we're going to put you guys into 2 roles. One of you will be in the role of learner, and one will be in the role of teacher. Now, in fact, the so-called learner had already been coached by the researcher, and he's in on the experiment. The teacher doesn't know that. So Milgram comes out, and he says, I'm going to have a random drawing, and it's going to determine which one of you is the teacher and which is the learner. So I have these 2 strips of paper and a hat. I want you guys to each pull one out, and on one of the papers it says teacher, and on one it says learner. Now, actually, on both of them it says teacher, but the person who's already been coached is going to act as though when he sees this piece of paper that it says learner. This enhances the belief on the behalf of the teacher that they could have just as easily been randomly selected to be in the other role. So it makes them believe even more seriously in the reality of the circumstance. Okay, now after they split them into teacher and learner, they said, now here's the way the experiment goes. We don't know how, what kind of impact punishment has on learning and memory. When a person is punished, does that make them remember things better or not? We really don't know, so we're going to study that. Now, they said then to the learner, come in this room, we're going to set you up on this little panel, and we're going to fit electrodes to your body. Now we need you to look at this set of words. There's a set of word pairs here. There's just pairs of words that are random pairings, like girl, spoon, dog, sun. Just random pairs of words. But the learner was supposed to look through that list and try and memorize the word pairs. Then the list is taken away, right? And they tell the teacher, okay, now we're going to put you on the other side of this wall, and basically you're going to have a system where you can ask questions to the learner. Now, go through these prompts. Read off the first member of each of the word pairs, and then we give them like 4 optional correct responses as to which was the corresponding member of the pair. So like say that the actual word pair was girl, spoon. Then the teacher would say something like this to the learner. Okay, the first word is girl, and the second word is, and then they would give them multiple choice. The second word is dog, spoon, fork, day, right? Now, if the learner remembers that the right pairing was spoon, he would answer spoon. Then he gets it right. That means he remembered the pairing. But if he says one of the other options and gets it wrong, then they told the teacher, that means you're supposed to hit a button on this shock generator, and that's going to send a voltage shock to the learner, okay? So basically, every time he gets an answer wrong on this word memorization thing, you hit him with a shock. And each new wrong answer, he's supposed to go up the intensity and voltage scale to give a more intense shock. Now, there's this little twist that I'm thinking you probably can gauge, and that is that there were no actual shocks being delivered at all. So the whole shock thing was a big, clever ruse. And when the learner was given the so-called shocks, they would scream out in pain and protest. At a certain point, as the voltage got more intense, the learner had been coached to refuse to participate any further, to say, I've got a heart problem, this is out of control, this hurts way too much, I can't take the pain, this is against my will, you gotta stop this, right? And these are audible protests and screams. So the teacher would hear all of that. And the question that the researcher had nothing to do with the effect of punishment on learning, because there was no actual punishment. So what was really being studied, guys? It was studying how obedient are people going to be in the light of these orders or commands that they're being given by a perceived authority figure. Will they break off as their own conscience dictates once they see that they're doing something that's going too far? Or will they just go all the way along and give all those shocks, despite the obvious fact that what they're doing has the potential to seriously harm or even kill the other person? Now, Milgram, he thought, and he had surveyed other professional psychologists to get their opinion. He said, how many percentage of us, how many do you think are going to refuse at some point? And it's a little sad in a way, because most of the people who had been asked this question, professional psychologists, they thought, oh, it's going to be a very small number. It's going to be less than 10% for sure, because they had great confidence in the kindness and generosity of our human nature, that we would, of course, refuse to acquiesce to these commands as it became clearer and clearer that they were being harmful. But the real results of the experiment are very dark and disturbing. In fact, as many and more than 2/3 of all the participants went all the way up the full voltage scale. But there was a healthy minority, about 1/3 or more, of people who refused at some point and did, in fact, say to the researcher, no, I cannot in good conscience do this, and I'm going to have to stop. And we learned something about the differences between the two cases, the people who refused and the people who went all the way. So the majority, those that did give all the shocks, sometimes they expressed, and most of the time they expressed hesitation, discomfort, awkwardness, like, I'm being asked to do something, but someone's screaming out in pain telling me to stop. I don't know, this is a tough decision, but they would still kind of like go on along with it. The problem they had was, as uncomfortable as they were not really able to provide like logical reasons and arguments as to why their participation would be wrong. But if you look at the video, and there actually is video, maybe I'll even have a chance to play some of it for us at the meeting. But if you watch video of this study, the people who did refuse, the sort of healthy minority contingent of about 1/3, they did offer logical reasons and arguments as to why they couldn't continue. So good critical thinkers are more likely to take the right actions and not just mindlessly obey when things that are being asked of them are inappropriate or immoral. And we want to be good critical thinkers, right? So we want to at least bring our own judgment to bear on the orders, commands, and directives that we get from other people, whether they're perceived authorities or not. Obviously, the officers in Nazi Germany couldn't make those judgments, and they're definitely the worse off for it. So we want to make sure that we don't invite judgment and scrutiny of our own moral record because we couldn't think critically about what to do. And that's what it says here in the text, so I could just read a little bit of it to connect it to our discussion. Nazi war criminal Adolf Eichmann was tried in Israel in 1960 for crimes against humanity. Despite his claim that he was just following orders, the court found him guilty and sentenced him to death. So was he just following orders, or was he an inhuman monster? To address this question, social psychologist Stanley Milgram of Yale University conducted between 1960 and 63 what has become a classic experiment. Milgram placed an advertisement in a newspaper asking for men to take part in a scientific study of memory and learning. Those chosen to participate were told that the purpose of the experiment was to study the effects of punishment on learning and that their job was to give electric shocks as punishment when the learner gave a wrong answer. The participants were instructed that the shocks would be given at the direction of the experimenter and would range from 15 to 450 volts. As the intensity of the shocks increased, the learner, which was actually an actor, responded with increased anguish, screaming in pain, and pleading to stop. Despite the repeated pleas, all participants gave shocks up to 300 volts. In addition, 65% continued to deliver shocks up to 450 volts, simply because an authority figure, a scientist in a lab coat, told them to do that. Most who continued were clearly disturbed by what they were doing. However, unlike those who refused, they were unable to provide logical counter-arguments to the scientists' insistence that they must continue. Okay, and so as good critical thinkers, the sort of human and social significance of it is that you're not this kind of people who just believe things for no reason or just do things without asking questions. You always bring your judgment to bear. That does not mean on the other extreme that you just become like an anarchist and you believe that there's no good use for rules ever, or that orders or such like are always to be considered with skepticism. It doesn't mean that. It just means, of course, there are valid and appropriate cases in which we have top-down control and a chain of command and some type of requirement that orders be obeyed. But not every single order is equal, and they have to be at least thought about by those who follow them. Even the military instructs people that way, that if you're given an illegal order, your duty by the Constitution is to refuse to follow it. Okay, now another famous social psychology experiment that also kind of gives a little lesson on the same idea is the one that, sorry, that I saw a student mention in this chat, and that is the Zimbardo experiment. Okay, so the Zimbardo experiment. Anybody know anything about this one? What do you know about the Zimbardo study? So yes, this is the prison simulation, exactly, Kayla. Some people placed into a jail, and some were told to act as inmates, and others were told to act as authority figures, correct. So sometimes this is known as the famous Stanford prison experiment. So this is a very famous experiment, widely known in social psychology and critical thinking. There's actually been a film, there's documentary footage of it that's quite fascinating. You can see the real footage of the actual experiment, but there was a documentary film reenactment of it that's on, I believe, Netflix that came out a couple years ago. I've had some students recommend it to me, and apparently it's just a good film and fun to watch. But yeah, the Stanford prison experiment. So a couple of details. It happened in 1971. And it was at Stanford University, obviously. The lead researcher, and the reason that it's named the Stanford Prison Experiment, is this guy, Philip Zimbardo. So Philip Zimbardo, psychologist and professor at Stanford, conducted the Stanford Prison Experiment. This was funded by the United States military with the US Navy. They kind of wanted to see how will ordinary people behave when they are placed into a social situation where some people have total control and other people don't have any, and when there's no real clear oversight guidelines that are given to those who wield the authority. So they basically put out an ad in the newspaper locally. This is up in like Palo Alto, Stanford area. And they recruited college students like you guys to come and be the participants. They divided the subjects into two groups, the guards and the prisoners. And what they told the guards was, okay, you guys, we're going to have a simulated prison set up in the basement of Stanford Psychology Department. And you guys are going to be the guards, the wardens of the prison. Now, here are the ground rules. Basically, you just can't cause like permanent injury or physical harm, but anything else is fair game. Anything you feel that you want to do to try and gain compliance from the prisoners, you can do it. So just do whatever you like as long as you stay within those parameters. So very, very loose, lax, and open-ended oversight guidelines. So it was intended to go for 2 weeks, right? But the simulation only lasted 6 days before they had to shut it down. Now, why did they have to shut it down not even halfway in? Well, because it quickly got out of control. The prison guards started to behave in increasingly brutal, oppressive, sadistic ways towards their, I mean, these are like their peers, right? Like, these are not real cops and real prisoners. These are people acting in a simulation. But even the roles and authorities provided within the context of the simulation got to people's heads so much so that they started to behave belligerently, abusively, and really cruel towards the people who were in the prisoner role. Like they would make them clean the ground with their bare hands and eat food off of the floor, take away their clothes, leave them in solitary confinement in like a little closet, sexually humiliate them by trying to put them in awkward and homoerotic orientations physically towards each other, like making them do a mock wedding ceremony and stuff. And this caused some of the prisoners to literally break down mentally within just a few days. Some of them demanded to leave and were allowed to leave. So a graduate student assistant of Professor Zimbardo, after 6 days, came to him and said, "You're gonna have to shut this down because I think this is getting out of hand. These students are being traumatized, actually." And he agreed with her, and so he did discontinue it. But once again, it revealed some important lessons that everyday people, and we're not talking about like monstrous people that are taken off of, the death row or something. Like we're not talking about hardened, criminals, or just average, everyday, normal college students. When they're placed in a social role where they have all this authority and control and loose oversight provided with which they can then have their conduct scrutinized, people will quickly lapse into cruel, sadistic, and abusive behavior. So what is the antidote and the cure to that? Being a good critical thinker. Being a good critical thinker makes you the kind of person who doesn't just devolve into your most base impulses, but rather thinks things through clearly and makes decisions based on principle rather than the heat of the moment, emotions that you may have, or other crude or sinister impulses that we hope to overcome as civilized human beings. So let me read what she said, the editor of the book. Along similar lines, in 1971, the US Navy funded a study of the reaction of humans to situations in which there are huge differences in authority and power, as in a prison. The study was administered under the direction of Philip Zimbardo, the psychologist, who selected student volunteers who were judged to be psychologically stable and healthy. So he tried to screen to make sure that these were all people with no mental illness or history of criminal behavior. Then the volunteers were randomly assigned to play the role of either guard or prisoner in a 2-week prison simulation in the basement of Stanford University building where the psychology department was. To make the situation more realistic, guards were given uniforms. So they gave the guards this appearance of being in a uniform. They were given khaki outfits, mirrored sunglasses to minimize eye contact and so that people couldn't see their expression as much, and little wooden batons. And then the prisoners were given these really poorly fitting orange smocks, and they were to wear a chain around their ankle, and they were just referred to by number, just by their number, so that dehumanizes them a little bit. And the guards were not given any formal instructions. They were simply told that they had to run the prison. The experiment quickly got out of control. Prisoners were subjected to abusive and humiliating treatment, both physical and emotional, by the guards. 1/3 of the guards became increasingly cruel, especially at night when they thought the cameras were turned off. Prisoners were forced to clean toilets with their bare hands, to sleep on concrete floor, to endure solitary confinement and hunger. And I mean, keep in mind, these are not real criminals. It wouldn't be appropriate to do to people under the due process that we expect human beings to receive in a legal system like our own. But it's even more absurd when this kind of behavior is visited upon people who are just participating in simulation. So it tells us something. If this kind of out-of-control behavior and these kind of tendencies can be displayed, even within the context of a simulation, imagine how much more powerful the temptation towards misbehavior and abuse can be when you have real authority backed by actual power like the US government or some other institutional framework. So good critical thinkers are going to be good citizens who execute their roles responsibly and with honor. And we want to make sure that we take away the lessons that have been taught to us by these different famous experiments. And that's why they start off the whole book in chapter 1 right at the beginning. Now, here's something else that's interesting, I think, to mention when I talk to you about these experiments. Why is it that it's 2020 and we're still talking about them? Aren't there newer studies that have been done since then? Actually, no. And the reason is because these experiments were done back in the day, before there were the same kind of ethics boards and guidelines that would have prevented them from being conducted now. The potential for the subjects in these studies to take on post-traumatic stress, which actually did happen to some of the members of the studies, this would never be allowed anymore. So we kind of always have to refer to them as like a time capsule now, something that was done then that still sheds light that we can learn from now, but we won't be able to replicate such studies because you're not going to be given funding or official clearance anywhere to run a simulated prison, especially when we saw how badly it went before. And in the case of Milgram also, think about the people who are being asked, keep shocking this guy. You got to keep shocking him. I know he's screaming out saying he's about to die, but keep doing it because you're in the study and that's what it requires. Now, you might do it or you might not do it. About 1/3 of people refused at some point, but 2/3 went all the way. Whether you're in either category, imagine being in that tough position, even though later on they, of course, debrief you and they say, it was not real. Here, we're going to show you the guy. You can see he's fine. We just wanted to see how you would react to the commands. You might think, okay, well, no harm, no foul. I know now that there was no problem. But still, you can have nightmares and weird memories coming later at just the temporary state that you were in, thinking that, wow, I'm now taking actions that very well could cause harm or permanent damage to another person. So these are studies that we learned from, but we can't really reproduce anymore because we consider it unethical in a way nowadays. Are cult leaders good critical thinkers? I mean, the leader, I would think no, because they have, if they believe the stuff they're saying, which is usually not based on rational or scientific information, then of course they're not. But you might argue that some of them don't believe the things they say, and they merely seek to manipulate and exploit the views of those who would follow them, so that it's the followers who are less good critical thinkers than the leaders of such movements. But I don't think that in every case the cult leader is some kind of like genius mastermind, if that's what you're getting at, who's able to trick everyone into following them. I think a lot of times they just unwittingly find themselves in the position they're in through the force of their personality or for some other irrational factors. So I wouldn't give like big credit to like Jim Jones or whoever for getting all those people to drink Kool-Aid and kill themselves. But yeah, anyway, that would be my take on that anyway. Of course, it's something that has to be judged on a case-by-case basis. Could there be very clever, critical-minded cult leaders that don't even believe the things they're saying and merely wish to have a cult following? I suppose it's possible. It's probably happened. But I wouldn't give it as a general case because I don't like to give any kind of positive judgment or whatever on the case of the cult leader, because what they're doing is wrong. Now, Kelly, you're saying, can you sign this? I don't know what you're referring to. Maybe you are in the midst of a chat or something that's not referenced here, or I just didn't notice the reference. Charles Manson is not a critical thinker. No, I mean, I don't think so. I would need more evidence to say that he is. Like I would need to see an example of where he reasoned competently using logic towards his conclusions. Just being manipulative and charismatic does not necessarily make you a good critical thinker, but it also can't be ruled out. Okay, now, next up. Wow, that blue marker is really tough. Okay. So the next thing that the textbook talks about are the different stages of a person's cognitive development in their life. So cognitive development overall is the idea of the lifelong process of acquiring intelligence and problem-solving abilities. Cognitive development, lifelong process of acquiring intelligence and problem-solving ability. So we all develop in life. We all started off as little babies, right? And of course, one track of our development is just our physical development. Getting bigger, growing, bigger bones, taller height, and all of that. At this point, I guess for most all of us, perhaps a few exceptions. I don't know if physical development in some rare cases can persist all the way up through your 18th year. But for the most part, I'm figuring that our physical development is kind of done at this point. But your cognitive development, so cognitive refers to like consciousness and the mind. Your mental development in life is kind of open-ended. It can go on with really no limits except for the natural limits of your lifespan. And of course, one other limitation could be like in later years, senility or cognitive decline or illness of some kind, cognitive illness. But other than that, there's really no upper boundary on how much we can continue to learn and grow intellectually. As they say, you can learn a new thing any time in your life, even when your formal education is over. I feel like I learn new things all the time, and certainly I'm way behind, way past my education at this point in time. So it's a lifelong process of learning things, gaining more intelligence, and also being better capable at solving the problems that life presents us with. Now, there have been people who've studied the concept of cognitive development across one's life, and there's this education researcher named William Perry Jr. He believed that there's 3 basic stages of cognitive development. So I'm going to try and talk to you guys about what those are. And this is all from chapter 1. So when you read, or if you have read chapter 1, you'll see discussion of these points there. So 3 stages of cognitive development. Okay, so starting with the first one, which is called dualism. Then there is relativism. And finally, commitment. Dualism, relativism, and commitment. And, oh yeah, by the way, the researcher who I'm talking to you about is, you see this header, so I can erase that. William Perry Jr. So we owe him for these basic concepts that we're now going to discuss. So he believed, or he did research, so he thought there was empirical evidence. Fun fact for Dr. Voigt, hippo milk is pink. I don't know, is that true? Is it not true? I really don't know. But I have to verify, but it sounds perhaps within the realm of plausibility. 3 phases of cognitive development according to William Perry Jr. 3 stages of cognitive development. Did you get that, Jamie? Cognitive development. What's cognitive development? The lifelong process of acquiring intelligence and problem-solving ability. But it breaks down into these 3 stages according to this this author that is written here. If it's not easy to read here, I'll write it in the chat. Oops. Okay, yeah, so cognitive development. The first one is the most basic and the initial phase of your intellectual life. You got to think of the cognitive level and habits of young children and maybe some adolescents. So dualism is the point where you think that truth is just all black and white. There's no ambiguity at all. Everything's already been answered. People have all the answers. So there's just no gray area. There's just black and white truths. And the thing is, at dualist level, you also believe that all the answers to every question come from authority figures, and your job is just to listen to them. So truth is all black and white, meaning there's no ambiguity and everything's already understood and known. And authority figures of whatever kind, those could be parents, they could be, community leaders or teachers or, media, but authority figures have the answers to all the questions. So let me write it one time, then discuss. It may be a little small, but what it says, I'll read. Truth is all black and white, and authority figures have answers to all the questions. So when one is a dualist, like a little child, for example, they believe my mom and dad and my teachers and the books that I read, they know everything. I don't know anything, they know everything. So all I have to do is just listen to them and they'll inform me of the facts. I don't have to think on my own. I don't have to come up with my own judgments. I'm just a part of this world that's a newcomer, and I'm going to take the things that these authority figures tell me as givens. So I'm like a container. Information is flowing into me from these higher sources of intellectual authority, and I just receive the information. I don't make judgments about it, and it comes to me from authority figures who I have total trust and confidence in. Right, so that's dualism. But after a while, that attitude breaks down if you develop cognitively, and you kind of make it to the second phase, which is where a lot of, I think, young adults and people your age are kind of at, which is relativism. Relativism is the opposite extreme. So that's when a person thinks that there's really no objective truth. There's basically just opinions. And so truth is all just a matter of personal opinion. And the relativist also thinks that these opinions are no better or worse, so they should all be looked at as equal and therefore not judged. So the relativism phase says that truth is all just personal opinion. Truth is just personal opinion. And, second part, all opinions are equal and should not be judged. Okay, it says, truth is just personal opinion, and all opinions are equal and should not be judged. That's relativism. So you start off your life as a dualist and you think there's just objective truths that are given to me by authority figures. I can't question it. They know everything, and I'll just follow. At the relativist phase, you start to realize that, even the experts disagree with each other sometimes. So there's not like 100% consensus on every question. And then you start to notice that maybe your friends, relatives, parents, and other people don't all agree with each other. So when you notice that there's diversity of opinion and disagreement in the world, you start to think, well, there can't really be any truth then. There's just opinions all around, but none of them are any better than any of the others. So I just let people have their views and I don't judge them. Now, I know that that's the way a lot of us think. Probably some of you do think that way. And it's not a bad thing, because certainly you want to have tolerance for the diversity of opinions, you know, lifestyles, religious views, lifestyle choices, and everything else that people do make. That's a very good thing, and that, I believe, has been really drilled into us in this current age, which is all for the best, right? We're very open-minded and tolerant people. But at the same time, there's a problem in a way, which is that this relativist perspective doesn't believe really in the existence of objective truth and facts. It's like there's just opinions, but there's no objective facts that we can all agree with, or that survive, you know, the battle of disagreement. So when you realize that there still is objective truth out there that can be discovered, and when you believe that you can discover that objective fact using your own judgment and the best evidence, that's when you get to the highest level of cognitive development, and that's the commitment stage. So at the commitment stage, a person commits to their own views based on reason and the best available evidence. So I'm going to just type it in the chat. It's a little low on the board. I like using the board, but in this case, I think it'll help to put in the chat. So commitment. So yeah, commitment, the definition, I put it there. One commits to their own views based on reason and the best available evidence. So when you reach that commitment phase, I think it sort of is like taking the best elements of the other two phases and putting them together, and avoiding the worst aspects of both too. So the commitment level of cognitive development means that you don't just accept the views of these higher authorities and think that you have no input of your own to give. You believe that you yourself are qualified to judge these questions using your own independent judgment based on the evidence that is there and your reason. Okay, so unlike the dualist, you don't just defer or outsource the intellectual labor on everything in life to others that you think are authority figures. You believe you are competent and well enough informed about the evidence to judge things on your own. But unlike the relativist, you don't think that the opinions that you arrive at here are just like not really objectively true. So at the commitment level, you do believe in the ability to pursue and actually achieve clarity and objective truth. But you also don't just think that it comes from other people, that you yourself can do it. So unlike the dualist, you think for yourself and you make judgments on your own. But unlike the relativist, you do not just think of those conclusions that you reach as being personal opinions that don't have any objective validity, right? And that's the kind of way of thinking and living that we're trying to, you know, instill within you guys as good critical thinkers. Have respect, tolerance for the diversity of opinions that exist, but at the same time, there's a saying I heard one time one of my advisors gave me, which is have an open mind, but not so open that your brain just falls right out. So you want to have an open mind to all the views that exist out there, but you still have to understand that there's some views that are not equal to others in terms of how well based they are in evidence and logic. So try to reach the correct conclusions. Don't just be disabused of the notion that there is such a thing as facts and reality that's objective. Even though sometimes we can't get to it, or sometimes we have a hard time agreeing about what the facts are, there still are facts, and we can commit to our own views about what those facts are using reason and the best evidence available. Okay. Now, there's a little more, of course there's more on chapter 1. This lesson on chapter 1 continues in Monday. I kind of wanted to be able to show you guys some of the video of the Zimbardo and the Milgram study because it's fascinating and it's helpful. I might send it to you guys as links over the weekend, or if I consider it and I think I have enough time, maybe I'll be able to sneak in some of that viewing by switching over to the Zoom platform for part of Monday's meeting and then putting it in the screen share through a YouTube playback. So we'll consider our options, but anyway, continue reading through chapter 1. That's what's listed for your reading assignment over the weekend. And don't forget to just get your homework done, because that's going to be due to me by class time on Monday as well. So there's a few minutes left in our time today. Any questions for me? Let me know if there are. If so, I'll take them. If not, then I guess we'll be okay, and you get on to your rest of your Wednesday. How do you guys feel? Is it good? give me some type of feedback or input. Thumbs up, or like the stream, or comment or something. What's good? Have we dealt with some good material and this is a fine lesson for you, or you want a little more information? Well, you'll let me know, right? I mean, I see that there's 76 of us. So if we finish the homework, can we email it to you now? Sure, yeah, you can email it to me whenever you like. I know a lot of students like to have the benefit of extra time, because if you turn it in early and then you think you made a mistake, you might regret that you turned it in early. So that's the only reason I could say delay submitting it, but I'm happy to accept it, and I've already submitted. So it's really on your own discretion. The main thing is just you got to get it in no later than 2:30 by email to me on Monday. But it's fine to send it in today, but it's not due till Monday, so you can just choose. Yeah, so let me just recap the main things I covered. Today, when we started off, I went over the review of the 4 forms of deductively valid argument. Argument from elimination, modus ponens, modus tollens, chain argument. I tried to help you understand how that material relates to the homework assignment that you've all got, okay? Then after that, I started to talk to you about the 2 famous social psychology experiments mentioned at the beginning of chapter 1. No, there's no new assignment yet, Jasmine. After the first homework assignment, the next thing following is a quiz the next Monday. So, and then there's a midterm, and then there's more homework after the midterm. So you'll see it in the syllabus. But yeah, then I start talking about Zimbardo and Milgram, okay? You think I should get monetized? No. I don't want to make any money. I don't need money. But yeah, I talked about the 2 famous social psychology experiments, the value and the impact they have and the importance they have on understanding good critical thinking. And then we talked about the stages of cognitive development, the work of William Perry Jr. The quiz, Jamie, is on chapters 8 and chapter 1. So it's going to be on all the stuff having to do with logic and argument that we started with, and also this chapter 1 material. So on Monday, the rest of chapter 1 has to do with talking about what are some of the qualities that good critical thinkers have, what are some of the benefits that come from being a good critical thinker, like what's in it for you. And then we'll also talk about what are some of the barriers to being a good critical thinker, like what are some of the obstacles that get in the way of doing it right or doing it well. When is the quiz? You're asking me questions about things in our syllabus, which is fine, but the quiz is the Monday that follows next week. Here, I'm going to pull up do I have it here? Yeah. Quiz, September 21st. Yeah, so it's Monday the 21st. It's a week after next Monday. So Monday the 14th, you're handing in your homework. Monday the 21st, you're going to be taking a quiz, and we'll talk about the quiz before the 21st. So everything I think is in order on that. But if you want any help on the dates, just do check the syllabus. Nothing's changed. Everything's the same. We're going through it in the order that you see it there. What else? Let me know. We only have so many opportunities to have like a little bit of real-time question and answer. So I like to designate a few minutes, maybe beginning and end, for that. And it's like I've already answered some good questions that you had, like, can you email me your homework? Yes, you can do it early. When is the next thing? It's the quiz. It's the next Monday. Anything else, or are we good? All right, I guess I see some of you feel like we're good. I don't want to, it's not like I'm trying to make you say something if you have nothing to say. So good all around, guys. Thanks a lot for your help today. I really appreciate it. Make sure to keep attending and keep tuning in every time we have a meeting. When we have quizzes and stuff, we won't have a normal meeting like this. You'll just be taking the quiz and you'll send it back to me. You'll receive the quiz through Titanium. But we have time to talk about it next week in the lead up to the 21st. So for now, focus on your first homework. Make sure to read the rest of chapter 1. Yeah, the cats, they've been out and about. They've been running around. I think they're sleepy right now, but they're just off to the side. So you'll definitely see them again soon. All right, guys. Well, this is awesome. Thanks so much. Take care. Have a great Wednesday, and stay safe, stay healthy. And I'll just be seeing you guys soon after the weekend. If you have any questions, you can email me till then. All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.